What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast. I'm Chris.
I'm DJ.
You are in the place where we journey deep, take some deep dives into the great mysteries of life, and see how we may cultivate a change in this world from the inside out. What sure way to create that lasting change that we seek, but to start within and pray that it ripples out like a benevolent virus across the world. Today we're going to be covering a conversation between podcaster Benjamin Boyce and Jordan Hall. And this is just an incredibly profound conversation. And I hope you guys enjoy as much as we have going through this, preparing for this episode. We're going to do this in two parts because there's so much to cover. And this is such I believe, an important conversation for our times. So we're going to start off with a quick intro to Jordan on the Benjamin Boyce YouTube channel. Check him out. Make sure that you're dropping likes and subscribes if you guys enjoy what we're doing, and those that we're covering. Make sure you get over to their channels. Look for the link in the description of this video, Benjamin Boyce's channel, and you can watch this whole video for yourselves. Let's go ahead and let's just jump on into it. See here. Rolling.
Then started my third company, or started a company, which was the third company I was in, called DivX. And DivX is what made the internet a visual network. And the idea was video is the kind of the crown, at least at the time, of media.
Yeah.
And if we can decentralize media, then we've got a fighting chance in this thing. You know, people can do things like ultimately have podcasts of Joe Rogan and Benjamin Boyce can have conversations about things that matter. And so we did that, and it worked out pretty well. And
yeah, it worked out really well. Now we actually do indeed have decentralized video creators all over the net doing this thing. I remember when DivX came out back in the early 2000s, I believe. It's
that was the player. It was your DivX player.
Yep.
So if you're trying to play any file from the internet, you had to use the DivX player. And then there was those, I remember those malware pop-ups that pretended to be your DivX player, like when
yeah, right.
Back in the days of like LimeWire and all that shit.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
The internet used to be the Wild West.
Boy, was it. Still is a little bit, but it's definitely starting to become more like cable TV every day, isn't it?
Well, I think more of the podcast or the colloquial term podcast world is starting. They're trying to throttle it back, but it is more of like the Old West feel, because now it's information can come from anybody. It can come from Joe in the basement.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you got
to...
this bifurcation where you have like the mainstream legacy media starting to build their infrastructure on the internet and their channels, but you also have this giant group of people that are developing and doing their own things independently. And we certainly are becoming the new media on this planet. I love it.
Yeah, and a quick aside, but remember during COVID when the news media had to go, podcast or underground basement mode, and how much it was just crap. The audio was bad. They couldn't get, the light balance right. They could, like without like all the people behind the scenes, they couldn't make it happen at all. And you've got Jonah's basement that looks great. It's just like perfect. I think that was the moment when people started realizing it's like, oh, there's this huge shift in mass media now. It's we went from books and then into newspapers, and then from newspapers to radio, and then from radio to TV, and then the XM thing tried to happen. It didn't really happen, but it set up the groundwork for things like the podcasting realm, because XM was kind of the intermediary between radio and
Sirius.
And now you can video stream just fine. And if it wasn't for this guy,
it would not have happened nearly as soon. And he helped make sure that it came about in a decentralized fashion, which was a great help. So yeah, he started the company that developed the DivX codec, made video possible on the internet. Go ahead and jump back.
Super smart cookie, and he's
very heartful individual as well. Greatly appreciate the work that he's doing in the world, and he doesn't want us to focus on him. He wants us to focus on what he's pointing at, of course, and just like we talk about on this podcast, that change we wish to see. So I like that he's not interested in fame by any means. So, but he did definitely make his nest egg early on, and he's been doing the good work ever since.
So for those
outside
people
of that world,
for those people who hate the evil capitalist, at one point in time, he was rubbing shoulders with all the evil capitalists.
Oh yeah,
so
yeah, he talks about that.
But well, anyway.
Well, yeah, he's going to tell us about that. So let's see that. So here we go, jumping back.
And then in 2007, I was extremely burnt out, physically, mentally, spiritually, relationally. And so I retired and I quit, and I haven't worked for a living since then. And so by 2008, we had a financial crisis, and I was in a really interesting spot that I now had a lot of access. Like I was at a location of potential influence, meaning I was sitting in rooms with important people or smart people, like Nobel Prize winners or heads of banks or heads of states, because I just had gotten to that point in my sort of arc of my life and career. And I was able to notice three things. One was the story outside those rooms, I say on MSNBC, was completely different than the story inside those rooms. So the narrative that we're being told by the official channels that are supposed to tell us at least the truth and at best relevant, accurate information was perpendicular to the story that was being told by the people who definitely knew better.
Okay, that's an interesting point.
Mm-hmm. The other thing was that the guys inside the room were panicked. They actually had no idea what was going on, and they had no idea how to deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that kind of goes in with my story about the COVID, period of time is like, well, they're, the high level, the people that you think are running the world and running all this stuff, and they don't know what's going on. So
they know more about what's going on, but they have no idea.
Yeah,
what to
exactly.
do. Yeah.
They know what's actually going on, and they still don't know what to do.
And what
about
we
it.
think is going on is a wholly different thing because they're only allowing us to see what they want us to see, whereas they're still scrambling themselves to figure out, okay, so how do we deal with this? So we're gonna jump ahead a little bit.
Yeah, so whenever you're feeling paranoid and thinking there's like a super capable like cabal of highly affected people that are controlling everything and they're like everywhere. Yes and no. They're not highly capable usually. Most of the people that are in it to control and not tell you things are just barely functional. We're a long way away from the Rockefellers and the Morgans and stuff like that. Like we're generations removed, and now it's their great grandkids that spent too much time partying at college.
There's a lot more players in high places, but there's definitely a fragmented structure there as well.
Yeah.
Probably a lot of infighting amongst the elites.
So they're probably closer to you at an intellectual and cognitive capacity than they're not.
Sure.
So you have the power.
So now Gordon's gonna get into how common knowledge being inverted between the people who are in the know and the people who are getting some kind of projected narrative. And he's going to introduce the idea of game.
And what I noticed was that every time I hit a vertical, meaning a discipline, it didn't matter what it was. It could be nuclear nonproliferation. It could be the concentration of estrogen in amphibians, like all these wild disciplines, just talking to smart people. It had the same basic structure, which was common knowledge was completely invert to what the experts knew. And then the experts were panicked. They're like, whoa, this is bad, and I don't know what's going on. And that nobody seemed to be thinking about what's going on at the deepest level that is maybe the generator function of all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so that led me to what was known as the Game B phase. So now we're talking about probably 2012, 2011. I had met Brett and Eric Weinstein at the Perimeter Institute at a conference that I think Eric largely catalyzed with a couple of other folks, which is principally about economics. But of course, what it really was a bat signal to try to bring in weirdos that Eric could talk to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Of which I was one. Okay. And
yep. So those names, Brett and Eric Weinstein, those are people to look up and follow as well. Thank you. Remembering. Those are guys to look up as well. They're involved in the Game B game that Jordan is speaking of here. And Dark Horse podcast is Brett Weinstein with his wife Heather Hain and Eric Weinstein. He had a podcast going for a while. Now he just does a lot of events, speaking with people on their podcast.
You've probably seen him on your favorite YouTubers. If you're into the intellectual stuff, and if you're here, you probably are. So you've probably seen him.
He's the guy that coined the term the intellectual dark web.
Oh yeah, was that him? Yeah. Well, there is an intellectual dark web going, and the roots, the grassroots, are growing out of it.
Mm-hmm. And that grew out of the Game B project that Brett and Eric and Jordan and Jim Rutt and a lot of people were involved in. So let's go ahead and go on to continue here.
Look at that face.
So by that time, there was really now a gathering of enough people that had gathered around this kind of a question to begin to formulate what these days would be known as the meta-crisis hypothesis. Are you familiar with that at all?
In a meta sort of fashion.
A very complicated way of responding.
Yeah, I'm familiar with a lot of the critiques on the meaning crisis, these various different crises.
So the formulation,
I think they all do converge. That's why I want to talk to you.
Yeah, they do. They do converge. So the meta-crisis hypothesis, which at the time was the Game A, Game B hypothesis. So we'd say that there's something very, very deep. First of all, what's happening is connected. There's a lot of connection between the events. So if you see something going on in a particular domain, let's just go with like the European financial crisis, it's not an independent thing. It's part of a very complex system. These things are interlinked and they're interacting with each other in a profound way.
Okay. So we have interlinked events that are happening that compound upon one another. They all feed in and affect one another. Everything is interrelated here.
A good example of that is like, well, what started World War I? It wasn't the shooting of, it wasn't entirely the shooting of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, right? There was a whole bunch of other stuff going on: conflict, cultural conflicts, country conflicts, factional conflicts. Maybe there was some bad weather, and crops weren't doing good, so the people were hungry and extra freaking angry. And
then a leader makes a mistake,
and a butterfly flapped its wings 2,000 years ago on the other side of the planet. So there's many things coming together. It's not a direct
that's
linear
the compounding,
function.
How they all interact with each other. Metacrisis is a term simply for the myriad existential, meaning potentially life or species-ending crises that our species is facing.
Yeah. It's not
currently right now at once, and how they all interrelate and feed in and build upon and exaggerate and compound upon one another.
Yeah, like we got the housing crisis, we've got the immigration crisis, we've got the humanitarian crisis, the environmental crisis, and there are grains of truth to all of these. And they are crises and issues. Crisis means happening now, in the moment now. Immediately, not tomorrow, not yesterday, now. And we're dealing with them all at once.
So jumping on back now.
So this is what was happening. So we were building a robust model of how complex systems operate in relationship with each other, sort of extending complexity science to its edge in the larger context of what's happening right now in the context of the humanity in the world, if you think of the world meaning Earth with people.
Yeah.
And the net was it's bad, right? The net was, it's very large. Like we're actually dealing with we sort of begin to build sort of a Richter scale way of thinking about it, that we're dealing with an event that's say 1,000-year to a 10,000-year event at a minimum, and could quite possibly be 100,000-year to a million-year event, right? So a million-year event is the birth of Homo sapiens. And the 100,000-year event is the Upper Paleolithic transition or the emergence of language and culture. 10,000-year event is the birth of the agricultural revolution and the birth of civilization. 1,000-year event is like the collapse of the Roman Empire. 100-year event is, I don't know, something stupid. Who cares? 100 years doesn't even matter anymore.
No, World War I, World War II. But then, still. Well, that's the thing, and I think they addressed this later on, is it's getting faster and faster and faster. So,
we're about to get right into that. Yep. There's a telescoping rate of the evolution of change. As technological capacity increases, things start to move even faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, and we're in that right now.
Yeah, it's the that in when was it, like in the 2010, 2012, the singularity. We're going to reach the singularity at some point in time. It's like, well, you never reach the center of the singularity.
No, you
it's just
don't.
speeding up.
Yeah, things just change faster and faster the closer you get to it.
Which means there has to either be a complete breakdown and an explosion, or there's going to have to be a controlled unraveling. So it's like, imagine you're spiraling in, but then you can smoothly spiral back out. Kind of, like how you look at DNA or two sound waves, they can kind of come together and then go back out and come together and go back out. Because, you can't just keep getting faster and faster and faster. There are biological limitations on how much a human can participate. So, but yeah, we could get super fast technology, AIs, chips to put in our head, but still, as a human, as we are, unless we're willing to really change ourselves to try to become, like God or a god, we can only function so fast in such a way that is human. Now, you can put the chips in your head that make you think faster and do all that stuff, or you can expand your life to be hundreds of years, but then you're not human, right?
Right.
We're like, at least, I'm not saying we, but like at least
that
me.
could be the million-year event, the transhuman.
Well, and that, and then it goes into the other end. If humans live too long or live infinitely, and sorry for the noise, there's
becoming a spacefaring species, that's almost as big as becoming intelligent Homo
Well, that
sapiens.
inverts the time scales now. So it's not going from million year to 100,000 year to 10,000 to 1,000. It's going back out the other end, but where a 10,000 years will be the equivalent of 100 years. Who cares about the 100 years? What's that going to do to us?
What is that going to do?
And that's a crisis we're having right now. Well, computing's getting faster. Our understanding of the universe is unveiling itself even faster. We don't know what to do with it. There's a lot of people, that are confused what to do with this knowledge, and some of them are intentionally, not intentionally, whatever, hurting humanity.
And the title of this episode is Courage in a Time of Chaos. So that's actually what this entire conversation leads into, and it's just beautiful. So we're going to jump on in now into that telescoping rate of evolution part of this conversation.
Does time, I'm sorry for a segue, you just make me wonder, is time not kind of changing shape as human beings advance?
What do you mean in terms of like accelerating change?
Yeah, like you're talking about million, thousand, decade-long events, but is it not because of the collapsing scale or the connectivity of human beings via the internet that events that would be 1,000-year scale take 100-year time affect as much change in 2 years?
This is one of the primary reasons why the magnitude of the event that we're dealing with is so large. Now, of course, some things like the diffusion of, heavy metals in water still operate according to the time scale of diffusion rates in water. But other things, like the rate at which heavy metals are being dropped in water, operate as a derivative of exponential growth, as mechanical. Other things, like the degree to which AI is producing more effective ways to put heavy metals in water, are operating on the far end, right? So you got these multiple different things that are operating at different time scales, and they relate to each other in complex ways. So that's the kind of shit. Like that's the kind of stuff we were dealing with in that time frame.
Wow.
Yeah. So like the example that I gave earlier about there's a limit to human biology on how fast they can do this. It's the same thing with our environment. There are limits, the limit that water can absorb things, and the speed at which, like the speed of gravity on the planet Earth. There are these limits that, the amount of space that we have on this planet. And, we measure things in parts per billion, parts per million, but, that's only a million parts, a billion parts. How many trillions of dollars are just thrown out the window? So we're now consciously thinking about much bigger than even that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Trying to figure out how to approach changing things in a positive direction when anything that we do from the traditional game A approach is not fast enough or effective enough or causes its own chain reactions of issues.
Yeah, or has been burdened down, as you make a game, the longer the game is made, the more or played, the more rules get attached to it and other things, to the point where it bogs down, and there needs to be a resetting of the game. Like tennis now is a completely different game than tennis when it was originally done. Football now is a completely different game and has a whole bunch of rules.
And we're also reliant on the current game, that if we just stop the game, then it's chaos.
Well,
so how do we build the structure of a new system at the same time that the current one is collapsing is part of the challenge.
Yeah, do you want to sacrifice humanity for, well, we got to stop destroying the planet? It's like, well, if your idea is to kill all of humanity, you stop the planet, us messing up the planet, then what are you doing it for? Because just honestly speaking, you're not doing it for the planet. You don't care about the planet. You can't. You're not a planet. You don't know how to plan it. You're a human.
We actually are an extension of this planet.
Yeah,
so
but
we are interconnected.
The finger doesn't know how to body. The finger just finger. I'm not going to finish that. But but no, for real though, there's the balance between, yes, we need to fix the problems. We're poisoning our for the pagans out there, we're poisoning our mother. And she's only going to be able to stay in us for so long. And if we keep poisoning her, it'd be less time. But we can't kill the kids off. We're the kids.
We are.
So we're doing all this not just for the mother, but we're also doing it for the kids. We're doing it for the family, right? And so it's there's something that needs to be done. And, any misstep we take can be disastrous.
Absolutely.
We're on a razor's edge here.
Yeah.
That's getting faster and faster and faster.
Yep. Oh, yeah, the cascading effects and that come along with the telescoping rate of evolution certainly do present a significant challenge. Here we go, jumping back.
The net of it was, by the time you get to the end of that, now we're sort of around 2014, 2015, was, we're actually nearing the end of this eon, this era. Things are going to begin to break increasingly regularly, increasingly importantly across a larger and larger set of systems, and we'll start to have cascade effects. And so we should expect to see the wheels come off the bus or the train off the rails, however you'd like to do it, somewhere around 2024. FYI, this is 10 years ago.
You guys didn't calculate quite correctly, did you?
And it kind of looks like, this sort of thing, and a big board. Like, okay, we're probably going to have a global pandemic. We're probably going to have another kind of global financial crisis. We should expect to see wars break out in escalating cascades that seem weirdly unable to be managed through structures that previously exist. Like, we should begin to see the cultures begin to break apart, because obviously these are all layers. Culture's a thing. We can talk about it. And so then the mission was, what can we do about it, if anything? Is there anything we can do about it? So this was kind of the Game A thesis, gets us up to that point. Game A is coming to an end. And Game A is at least as old as civilization, right?
Yeah. So that's Game A. It's this current civilizational game that we've been playing since really the advent of civilization, language, agriculture, and how technology expands our potential, but now even our current way of handling things is no longer effective.
Well, yeah,
cannot meet the challenge,
and not even just our current way of doing things, right? Because that current is a current to keep flowing, but our mode of thinking about, and he said something there, which is there anything we can do about it? That's the Game A, opposed to, okay, well, what can we do about it? What can't we do about it? What are the, you have to problematize the meta crises, the meta crisis, and move further, dig deeper.
Yeah, because we're realizing now that the hacking at limbs, addressing only the symptoms rather than treating the root, is not effective, is not fast enough. And we really do, like you said, need to go deeper. We need to get down to the root.
And a lot of times actually very destructive and I don't want to say counterintuitive, but counterproductive to both counterintuitive and counterproductive to the issues that we have right now. Yeah. And I don't think that's like humans are stupid kind of failing thing. I think that's just more of we've
We're in a very novel situation.
We've come to the edge of the next step.
Yes.
And we're not sure how to take that edge. Like if you ever watch like a little kitten or a dog try to figure out stairs, we've gotten like 2/3 of the way up. It's like, yeah, I got up these stairs, but now you're looking down and you're like, oh crap,
I haven't done this before.
There's only this much. Okay, there's this much I think ahead of me, but I know how much is behind me, and I don't want to go back. I can't turn around on this step. Yeah. So
well, let's jump on back now. So make sure I'm in the right place. Are
at least 10,000 years old. And the roots of it, I think, are actually ontological. It's structured in a way of thinking about how, like scarcity or entropy or things like that, zero-sum games. There's a bunch of deep stuff that's woven into it. And the question is,
could you extrapolate on what this game A is? Or are we talking about the way that human beings interface with human beings in the world? Like civilization, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, civilization. And specifically what I mean is the open-ended cascade of how human beings use technology and how that use of technology creates an expansion in possibility that moves us further and further from our adapted environment. So this is Brett, right? Brett wrote a book, Hunter-Gatherers, 21st century, that piece, and produces increasingly difficult to track causal chains. So an example would be for a bronze or for a Sumerian, when I hoe the earth and am able to optimize for the fertility of that earth with regard to the seeds that I'm planting. So I'm using technology to change an equilibrium state in a complex environment. Right. I don't know that by doing that, I'm also killing bacteria and and fungi that live in the earth by exposing them, by tilling them up, that are actually fundamentally necessary for the fertility of that soil.
The unforeseen consequences of interactions that we have not yet engaged in, these surprising outcomes that we could not have foreseen, lead us into a situation where we have to find increasingly novel and creative solutions. Okay, so jumping back again now.
Real quick. I'm gonna say hi to Ninja Bat. I know you, Ninja Bat. I'm gonna get a busty out as far as how I know you, but thanks for watching. I'll look at your comments later.
I appreciate you guys tuning in with us here.
Yeah, no, Ninja Bat's got a lot of them.
Oh hell yeah!
We'll have to sit down with them, and actually, it would be in the future if you want to do a short 20-minute interview, it'd be pretty cool. But yeah, hey Ninja Bat,
I'm game.
I sent him a text earlier, and now he's subscribed. So shout out, yo!
Shout out to Ninja Bat. Thank you for joining. Here we go.
All right, so I don't know what I'm doing is making a technological intervention that didn't exist in the universe at all until then to get a local optimum at the expense of a global desert, right? To drive desertification. That's the idea. Right? So there's these causal chains that are outside of our capacity, are literally our capacity to perceive, that put us increasingly in a game of local optimization, trading off for a global crisis or long-term crisis, and then we have to kick the can down the road by taking a larger dose of technological intervention to expand the scope of what we can do, which puts us on there's a race effect. Now we're on
because now the global crisis, the potential crisis is just growing. We keep pushing it off, keep sweeping the dirt under the rug. The rug's starting to become a pile now.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like non-pubescent acne. It's usually from your diet and other stuff like that, and you're like, well, I keep layering shit on and keep putting off the not eating whatever the hell's killing you kind of thing. Yeah, those Cheetos are great, but your body might not like them, and it's just gonna get worse and worse and worse, and then the more cream you slather on your face, the more the pimples are gonna build up, and then you're probably, if you're doing that, you're probably also just sweeping underneath your rug, and then you trip on it and hit your face. And
yeah. All right. So a few more seconds on this clip here.
There's a vector. Now we're stuck. We can't not keep. We have to do more, not less. Which is kind of where we are.
So it's kind of like an addiction. Well, having to take more to achieve the same effect.
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy.
Yeah, well, it's like that, that Tylenol or the ibuprofen that whenever you get a headache and then you take it and you're like, oh wow, like it gets rid of it, but then you get another headache and you keep taking it and you keep taking it and then you take it before you even get it the headache. And you keep doing it and you keep doing it and keep doing it. And now it's ain't about the headache no more, right?
No resistance.
Well, and even
or that too, yeah.
It's not it's like, well, now, like, well, look at the environmental activism, look at the social justice activism and all this stuff. It's like taking the ibuprofen and not needing it. I mean, I'm not saying there's not atrocities going in the world and there aren't issues with how we're treating our planet and ourselves. I'm not saying that at all, but it's almost by rote. We're doing we're doing the process because it's the process, and this is what we know. This is the aspirin that we've always taken, and I've always taken aspirin, right?
Yeah, good point. Alrighty, guys, jumping ahead a little bit now into the video, and the comparison of this time being similar, perhaps to something like a Bronze Age level collapse, perhaps even greater than that, becomes a part of the discussion.
So, but the game A thesis is we're in one of those, like we're sort of proximal to a Bronze Age collapse kind of event. But what's novel about where we are is that for the first time ever in human history, the entire world is entrained, deeply entrained, in a single civilization system. And the magnitude of the distance of that civilization system is like 6 orders of magnitude more intense, both in terms of population and in terms of the amount of energy flux through the system.
Yeah. Okay.
So we would be looking at something that would be something like a global scale, 1 million times as intense Bronze Age collapse.
Yeah.
And of course, that looks, it's hard to know exactly how bad that would be. Arguments are that it's an extinction event, others that it brings us back down to the Paleolithic age. The likelihood that we stop at kind of like the Steam Age or the kind of mid 1800s is very, very, very low, but non-zero.
Right. Okay.
But somewhere in that trajectory, you can.
Okay. So he makes a good point there. We could be approaching something like a Bronze Age level collapse, which was probably even greater than the situation following the collapse of Rome. This is one that's pretty far away in our cultural memory. But on a global scale, that is a terrifying prospect, and so we certainly do need to summon up the courage, the heart, to be able to face these times as they are, and find ways to network and work together to do this, rather than allowing ourselves to be so easily divided.
Yeah, well, because it's terrifying. Because during, I guess, the first, the first Bronze Age collapse, that was the world for them, but it still wasn't the entirety of the world, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if this happens globally, and I think the closest thing that we saw or we have seen within recent enough memory to have film of this is World War II. And still that, I think, could pale in comparison to what we may be coming up against soon. And I'm not doing the it's they or them doing this or anything like this. No, like, we could mess up yet again. We're on a razor's edge with this.
We are doing this collectively as a species
and individually to a pretty deep extent. Like I know it's hard to.
You're right, though.
That's
a tough one to face, though, and that's.
Well, yeah. Like, how do you find personal responsibility as a collective species?
The way to approach this realization, I think, is from a place of love and care.
Sure. That's how families work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the best scalable.
That's the best solution to any crisis from the family, too. Yes, a loving approach.
Well, even our concept of religion is based off of the family structure. Our concept of governance is based off of a family structure, and I don't think it is religion and governance is forcing this family structure on us. I think it's the other way around.
No, the family structure is what survived our species since the age of cave.
Yeah, yeah. So, and how do we actualize this? I'm not sure. I do know that discussing it, talking openly, being willing to be wrong and being wrong in public and you know, being able to deal with that.
Yeah,
is
and caring
important.
less about being right than finding a solution.
Yeah.
So coming from a place of love rather than a place of trying to, win another argument. Very important.
Yeah, so Ninja Bat's thinking that only small communities will work.
That's,
I think that's one way to go about it, but I think ultimately,
Jordan actually does have a theory on that. He has an idea of developing civiums rather than
yeah,
cities.
yeah.
And so we come down to smaller groupings that are networked together in hubs, but groupings around 200 people, which is around the maximum of what we can seem
like
to
150
operate
to 200.
together.
What is that, the
without,
Rorsch limit or whatever it's called?
or Planck limit or something like that, yeah.
But yeah, so, well, and I want to mention that too, is like, yeah, that may be the case as far as like individual to individual, but still we are in a global interface at this point. So we have to be able to maintain that and also scale that higher.
They interconnected, but not be smashing ourselves by the tens of thousands into small cities.
Cramming ourselves into big, like New Yorks and Beijing's and because Bangkok's is not a good idea in my opinion.
Yeah,
But,
and Jordan's theory of the civium is that he sets it up by describing how, and you can look up Jordan's civium videos. He's had a lot of conversations and he's done some specific videos on his own talking about it. But the theory is that cities are the support pillars for civilization. And if cities are faced with a problem so great that the problem with cities is that you have to create more and more complex and sophisticated ways of handling everything from food and water supply to trash disposal to dealing with disease and crime. Everything gets magnified in cities and compounding effects. So, and we just saw this during COVID. If, say, there's a large-scale pandemic, it ends up affecting not just the healthcare system, but the education of children and people. And, it ends up affecting everything. So how do we create anti-fragile systems that aren't so easily fall to prey to those kinds of, cascading effects?
we should definitely do an episode on this in the future. Hey, if you want to hear an episode on this in the future, put it in the chat. But no, I think that would be good to talk about it.
No doubt.
It's not specifically about this episode, but still, there has been a lot of thought about this out there that is very intriguing, whether you agree with it or not, but still very intriguing.
It's good for us to start mapping out the problem space and figuring out how we may begin to approach this, and that's what Jordan and others in the Game B community have been doing for like the last 20 years or so. So there is a lot of great content out there. So let's jump back now. They're going to get further into the magnitude of the size of this problem that we now face as a species. What an exciting time to be alive. Because we are at a transition point here. If we make it through this fork, it's like we can go one or the other way.
It's either fly or die, and flying's awesome. Well, dying, I guess, in one way is awesome too, but different.
All across the universe, one may consider how, an intelligent species probably does get to this point eventually where it can almost kill itself, or it can achieve the potential to become interplanetary.
What do they call that?
We are certainly at that juncture, it seems.
The great filter.
Yeah, we have the technology to be able to fly out into space now and begin to explore further, but that same technology can destroy us. And if we have not learned to live symbiotically enough to be able to actually, get along here, then we don't get to make it off the planet. So yeah, there's that.
Well, it's not even we don't get to. We won't have the capacity or natural affordances to do so.
No.
But we don't have the affordances.
I mean, we don't get to as like a treat. We don't get to experience
exactly.
it.
Yeah. We don't have to. We don't get that freedom if we can't understand the constraints.
Right. So it's exciting, and all great things do have some trepidation behind them. So here we go. We're jumping back.
But the bottom line is really bad, right? Really bad, super bad, like bad enough that it reaches the mythological level. Like it starts to feel very apocalyptic. I've started taking on the term that I'm a practical eschatologist.
Practical eschatologist.
Okay. Yeah, and so from that point, the work was, can we do anything about it? And if so, what is a vision that is equal in magnitude to this magnitude of the problem? And the way I've talked about this to some people is like, look, if you're let's say you're sitting on a ship, on a boat, and the boat is sinking, and the toilet is broken. If you fix the toilet, you've done something, you fixed the toilet, but that's really not the problem you should be focusing on. And it doesn't solve the bigger problem at all. But if you haven't got a vision that's able to be aware of the fact that the real problem is that the boat is sinking and your attention is focused on the local problem you can grasp, everybody's going to be fixing toilets.
So yeah, don't be wasting your time trying to fix the toilet when the ship is sinking. Wrong button. Boom. So now we get into the game B response.
Yeah. So instead of fixing the toilet because the boat is sinking, it's not even addressing that the boat is sinking either. It's realizing in a submarine you have to figure out a new toilet. If you all don't know how a submarine works, it's a tube underwater that's pressurized, and you still need to get rid of your waste and have it expelled out into the sea because storage is very limited. But you can't just like pull the handle and let it flush out because it go the other way because water's really heavy.
High pressure.
So as humans, we need to figure out how to build a toilet in a submarine, essentially, which is taking in the whole and the environment that you're in. And well, it's new rules. The bottom of the ocean is completely new here. Something we've never experienced before. So it's a new game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so let's learn about the psycho-spiritual response, as Jordan describes it.
And so that was, and that's not easy. Like, it's not at all easy to think about what does it look like. It's bizarrely impossible, nearly. What does it look like to construct something or come up with a way of responding to this that is equal in magnitude? So we're talking about a problem that is, again, 10,000 years or bigger. And that, by the way, is the fork historically and sort of the way that trajectory worked, where, say, Brett went one way and I went another way, because that's where the meaning crisis starts to kick into the conversation. From my point of view, the sort of psycho-spiritual piece is at least as important as the socio-technical piece.
Okay, I like how he puts that, because there was kind of a point in time where Game B did kind of split off into different directions. They didn't do so with animosity or even a great deal of, or maybe there was some disagreement as to which approach is best, but I think ultimately through dialogue, the Game B community came to the conclusion that, okay, let's all kind of go off in our separate directions and start working on these different approaches, because they seem to be perhaps equally important. The socio-political response needs to be happening concurrently with our own psychological, spiritual response as well. That's well put. And we're going to continue on here because there's a little bit more on this clip.
And they're at the very least tightly coupled.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And that because we use the psycho-spiritual piece to think about anything, we can't just use the existing psycho-spiritual thing that we're working with to try to think about the problem. We've got to do this crazy thing, which is to teleport out of our minds, not into insanity, but into something else that can actually respond to the reality that we're in.
So that's a crazy sounding move, right? We got to teleport out of our current frame of thinking, not into a place of insanity, but in a place of new sanity, or true sanity, perhaps. The here and the nowness of the moment, where we transcend our mental conditioning and ideas of how things should be or how things are traditionally resolved, and come to experience the moment as it actually is prior to our interpretation of it, so we can get a clear view.
You remember during the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, when we were talking about like what is horror?
Oh yeah,
like what actual horror is, and I like say the encountering of the thing much greater than oneself, the numinous, the beyond, this so far beyond our understanding that it terrifies us.
Yes. And even something that is greatly awesome is
so
the term awe.
It could make you, exactly,
right?
Awesome, awful.
Yeah.
It could make you go crazy, or you could find the meaning through it and come to a better relationship with your arena as an agent in the but you could also go completely nuts by it as well. And what we're trying to avoid is the going completely nuts with having this encounter with something so much more muchness than we are.
Yeah. Do not give in to astonishment, as Terence McKenna once said.
Well, yeah, and
so that we
try
may
not to go
integrate
crazy.
the new realization. Yeah, I love that. Now we get into a little bit on Ian McGilchrist, which is someone else that we're going to have to cover on this. Jumping on over.
So the first order, can you critique? Can you find a critique that allows you to get some sense of what wrong answers look like? That's helpful. And so, for example, McGilchrist's critique is very helpful. He's able to say, hey, look, anything that is sort of clearly or likely the result of a deeply left brain dominant point of view is the kind of thing that you're not going to find the right answer in. So, and the inverse of that actually turns out to be, and something that seems to be more in a whole brain way of looking at it is likely useful. So heuristically, think about that, like work in that direction. Mm-hmm. Others is you can do a survey. Say, okay, well, what are existing practices that seem to have long lineages that are oblique, that are not the same as mine, but have been able to hold on? They're not, how do I say it? They weren't invented in the last year, right? They're not cults. They're actually lineages that have depth to them. And what happens if you kind of drop into that lineage? Can you get a parallax? Can you do consilience on the larger problem from multiple different, plausibly valid psychospiritual mental forms?
Okay, so he's talking about left brain versus right brain, and we need to get a balance between the left and the right. The left is great at narrowing in on fine details, and the right brain is very good at taking in a whole gestalt and getting a wide view, angle, perspective on things.
And that would be
these need to be an opponent process, working together to fine tune our perception of
and
reality.
Not either or, but non-dual. The moving through both at the same time.
We've been in so much of a left brain mode for the last, God knows how long now, but certainly the last century at least.
Well, and then on the opposite end, though, we've had the creative, rebellious type that have gone completely, right brain, overly creative and self-destructive because they don't have any constraints or, grounding. And I'm a creative. I'm a musician. I get it. I'm in that world of from the chaos, like playing in the chaos to build order within the chaos.
Might be why we lose so many great creatives around the age of 27. Sure. There's that burnout effect that can happen. Yeah.
So it's the both, and the transcendence, the transcendent understanding in being mode that comes from the embrace of both, this right-handedness and this left-handedness that's going on, like an opponent process.
Yeah, the Buddha isn't meant to stay up on the mountaintop after he achieves the realization of oneness and interconnection with all things and has this wide-angle view of reality now that he's zoomed back and feels incorporated into the whole. He must come back down from the mountain and take that insight that he's gained and now interact, both feet on the ground down there in the community again. So, jumping in for just
being able to not hold two different ideas in your contradictory ideas in your head at one time, but to be able to logically succeed in figuring out how things can fail. I don't know how to explain it any clearer than that, because yet again, it's clear but deep. The bottom is out of sight.
It's bottomless, depthless. Here we go.
What happens is very interesting is that as that process begins to develop, what you begin to notice is that let me see if I can figure out the right way of putting it. The dominant mental model or the psychospiritual state that is typical of game A, late stage game A, typical of most people in the world right now, is actually a flavor of insanity. And so healing from that insanity into a more fundamental mental mindset, which is a deeper substrate that is upon which other structures are built, is not just entirely available, but actually sort of generically useful. Not becoming sane as a basic level is a first step. So it turns out we're actually not sane, but dysfunctional. Like we don't have a sane structure that doesn't work. We actually have an insane structure. So healing that insane structure back into a sane substrate, which is available, then gives you a lot more capacity to begin to think about what would be more now staying sane, a responsive structure on top of that.
We have a clearer view of reality now. We're no longer seeing through our conditioning that has gotten us into this mess in the first place.
And we have more, like, since there is a limit at how much input that we can take in as thinking creatures and societal creatures, it gives us more space, or at least more efficient space, to encounter and to log and to understand. Yes. Oh, well, it's kind of like how, like with computers, you know, first they were huge monstrosities, and the parts were really big, and then we've figured out, you know, how to make things smaller, and then we figured out a new technology that's does the same thing but is completely different, that can get even smaller and smaller and smaller. Same amount of space in the world. It's just more efficient.
More efficient.
So the game B should be, we don't know because we're not in it, but should be a more efficient utilization of the pre-existing space that we have.
Because we're getting a truer perspective on reality now, that we're no longer operating under programs that got bugs.
Maybe more refined, and in some ways more sophisticated,
more optimized.
Yeah, more optimized. That's the word. More optimized. Well, at least, right?
Right. Into that. Going on. Oops.
Oh,
my bad, guys. I was just muting that as I moved things around. My apologies. These frozen faces are great.
For that makes it make sense.
Yes. So sanity would be something like a proper relationship with actual reality.
Okay.
With the whole of actual reality. Meaning not like all of reality completely, but not with a part of reality, but not other parts.
Okay. Wow. That's a tall order for a little squishy human being organism to do.
Yeah, but it's sort of naturally part of it. This is the right brain, left brain. Right? The right brain has diffuse awareness, which is oriented towards the larger whole. The left brain has focused, concentrated awareness, which is oriented towards parts. If you overbias towards the left brain, you have a mind that becomes analytical and tries to simulate wholeness by the virtue of integrating analytical parts.
Brilliant.
That's insanity.
That's true.
As soon as you say, look, I have a mind that is capable of sort of being in relationship with wholeness, qua wholeness, in the same modality as wholeness, and can look at parts, that's just natural. That's just part of where I am. That's a lucky accident. Actually, it's not at all. It's intrinsically necessary as a result of how reality works. But that's what I have. Then you say, okay, I can go there. And from there, I can start doing interesting stuff.
Really? So in the same modality as wholeness, but still able to interact with these separate parts. So coming from a place that transcends our ideological identification, our egoic identification, all of our conditioning, all of that stuff. This is going to require a lot of inner healing for a lot of us to be able to pull off this transition.
Well, and it's also going to be
beautiful calling, though.
Uncomfortably.
I mean, this is what Jesus and Buddha and all these guys before us started.
It's going to be uncomfortably alien as well. It's kind of like using your left hand to wipe your butt or brush your teeth.
Yeah, right.
But
right.
we're going to have to be able to, like...
That's actually a really good left brain, right brain practice, is to actually do that kind of thing. So, like, you know, brush your teeth with your left hand tonight if you're right-handed. And little things like that.
Yeah, and the practice of integrating to... I'll say contrary aspects to our cognition.
And to being able to entertain ideas without having to agree or adopt them is
and that's actually I think
wisdom.
I think that's where societally that's where we're gonna have to like how we personally you practice by brushing your teeth with your other hand and doing all this stuff, but culturally and as a erring on collectivist species that we have to practice this, and one way to do it is, you know, having these conversations and opening yourself up to being okay with being wrong, not just with being wrong, but being okay with being wrong.
Yes, absolutely. We got to care more for what is true and good for one and all than actually being right. You know, who cares if you're right? Let's find out what is truly right.
Well, and if you're actually wrong and everybody says that you're right and you go down down that avenue, then there's destruction down that avenue.
Yes. And if you just want to know the truth, then you're excited when you find out you were wrong about something. You get to upgrade,
Well, you become better. Every time you're proven wrong and you learn a little bit, you learn more about what is wrong about what you're thinking about, the closer you are to being right. Even if you are not right, at least you get closer.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Now I can operate and respond more efficiently, more optimally to the situations at hand. I can help those around me and be more productive, so on and so forth. Okay, falling back into reality. Oh, first, we're going to get into practices to integrate a little bit. He kind of just dusts over the point that we need to start integrating many variant practices. Right on. So let's go on and check this clip out now.
Okay. So is that something, well, if it doesn't seem like that can be arrived at by thinking your way into sanity. It seems like you have to integrate practices.
That's right. Yeah, you definitely can't think your way into there from insanity to there. That's a bad thing. Many people have tried that, by the way. You end up in a really bad situation when you try to do that.
Yeah, I've seen photographs of Nietzsche in his later years.
So, speaking of practices to integrate, meditation, Jordan brings this up in a moment. Practices like self-inquiry. Who is it that is thinking? Asking this to ourselves. Who is it that is feeling these things? Because we have an idea of ourselves that we've built up in our minds. We have this kind of image, jumbled ball of ideas, and all of the conditioning and everything that we've gone through growing through life. We can become identified with that cast image, that personage. And when we practice something like meditation, self-inquiry, we are experiencing the ground of being, the ground of awareness itself prior to our mind's interpretations and preferences and so on and so forth, and learning to be here in that moment in a way that you are kind of able to be detached emotionally from the ideas that we hold in our minds, and we're able to perceive them as though almost from outside or above. And you can learn a lot about oneself in these kinds of practices. It certainly cultivates and deepens one's capacity for patience and understanding, and nothing but a good thing. But it's also just quite a peaceful and blissful experience once you start to really tap into this moment and watch the mind as it plays around and tries to keep itself company. It's kind of amusing.
The mind keeping itself company.
So, falling back in.
Or simulationists. And if you fall in,
we need to zoom ahead a little bit on this.
Zoom, zoom, zoom. And remember, folks, that a practice is a
simulation
is a participatory thing. You participate in the practice. It is not a passive thing. It is very active. Participate in it, and then eventually you embody your own practice. And if you're a person who practices at working out, you literally embody it, because then you're like, swole, whatever. But
swole fam.
Yeah. Soul fam.
All right, let's go. Oh yeah, I did the mute thing again.
Oh no, technical issues. You need a button for that.
Yeah, we need an extra human to help us out here. Anyone that wants to run the AV in the background.
I will endeavor to take the metaphor at all, any given metaphor, my way of imagining reality, I will take as being reality. Simply put.
Okay.
As opposed to go, hey, the actual thing is to give up my way of imagining reality. Notice that when I fall back, there's actually not a falling into madness, but actually a falling into reality. And then I can begin to reconstruct native faculties to begin to navigate reality properly. Practices. So then you have practice, lots of practice, all kinds of crazy practices. In my case, I had to learn how to feel properly.
Learn how to feel properly.
And so that falling back into, say, like, you're not falling into madness, you're falling into reality, much like falling into a pool of water, and then figuring out how to swim and negotiate around within this pool of water. Because, well, madness is like aerated water. You do not float in madness, just sink. But reality is a multi-dimensional framework that you can move within. And well, we can try to move without it, outside of it, but we do that with our
Imagination.
our imaginative feelers.
Mm-hmm.
While we're within this thing, we send the feelers out. You know, you don't want to be living outside of the pool of water because you're always trying to jump out of water, spending all your energy, and then you drown when you fall back into reality. But
so
game B
practices.
Yeah, well,
learning to swim.
Yeah, practice swimming, mental and physical swimming.
Like Braille? No, like emotions.
Like Braille.
I mean this very precise. Like I'm sitting in a chair, I'm imagining a moment, and the guy I'm talking with goes, "Okay, so you've gotten to the point where you fully recognize that you can't think your way out of this." Like, yep, got it. So now you have to do, at least at a minimum, you have to be able to discern feelings. I go, okay, what's that like? He goes, okay, well, let's start simple. How about sensations? Do you have a sensation, a physical sensation anywhere in your body? Like, yeah, sure, I can feel that I'm sitting in a chair. I can feel kind of cold air blowing on my face. I have this kind of warm, fuzzy feeling in my chest. And he's like, okay, that one.
Yeah, okay.
Spend some time noticing when you feel that. Is there something going on in your experience that seems to be correlated with it that you could give a name to?
That's a
right?
point.
That's literally my actual experience of life.
Wow.
Yeah. So that warm, fuzzy feeling, that definitely tells you when you're tapped in a healthy way. That's a really special feeling. I like how his friend helped him narrow in on that. Okay, notice when that's happening. What are you doing? What is happening in that moment?
He mentioned that, like, well, he had trouble understanding feelings. Probably on the Asperger spectrum, or something like that. But that's aside. But yeah, okay. So what are these feelings? We'll start with your sensations. What are you feeling? Oh, well, I'm a little warm. I'm looking a little dewy. This chair's not really that comfortable. But then as you're move from those outside feelings, and then you're scaling down, you're scaling inward. Moving from the transparency to opacity, and you get to the point where you can see, well, there's that warm feeling underneath of all of it, and it's like, okay, there. And or it could be a sour feeling. Well, like if you're not in balance and you're not at ease, probably a sour feeling that you're holding on to. Well, so it's like you're moving from this outward position through it down into, and while doing that, losing sight of the external case. Like I'm not realizing that my butt hurts, not realizing how sweaty I am. I'm not realizing that I'm moving down into that core of that feeling.
I like how he brings up that warm, fuzzy feeling too, and that's an indication of when you're wholly involved in a moment and you're not responding or reacting to it according to programming and previous conditioning. There's just this full involvement in that moment, and it feels great. And it often happens when you're in this kind of a state of communion with someone else, in a caring kind of interaction.
Interactionary.
Good stuff. Yeah. So we're gonna let this part continue a little now.
So practices, lots of practices, meditation practices, breathing practices, emotional release practices, relational practices, getting into a relationship, the practice of getting married, the practice of learning how to be a parent, like all that kind of stuff. These are all practices that are, by the way, minimum viable practices for a sane toolkit.
Yeah, right.
Your practices are your tools.
And then, I tried all kinds of different drugs, and I tried all kinds of different, subcultures, did the indigenous thing, did the Buddhist thing, did the Hindu thing, like all that kind of stuff too.
I want to go in so many different directions.
Okay, so that's interesting. So he tried a lot of different modalities, a lot of different techniques out, and realized, okay, there's a lot of good stuff in all of these, integrating various practices together that we find to be mutually beneficial. And we see that happen. That's happened throughout human history, in fact, that our spiritual and wisdom traditions have informed one another. Traveling along the Silk Road. Oh, thank you. Yeah, let's get that transition right. Thank you. And traveling along the Silk Road, we're meeting each other and trading disciplines and ideas, insights, and they are further informing our own traditions. And That seems to be a healthy thing that humans do.
The interesting thing, though, is
not cultural
at least what I'm saying, you know, like we go through the Buddhist tradition, and Buddhist is very much scaling down, going from opacity into, from transparency into opacity, that meditative state, and blocking it out. There's a whole there's a whole bunch of practices that we can do that also bring us up into the Gestalt state, seeing everything. So when we're talking about practices, it's not just left brain practices or right brain practices. The left brain practices being the down into the individual thing, going from transparency into opacity, and the right brain being going from opacity to transparency, moving out. It's the both at the same time.
Yes.
And then that's where, like, you know,
so that's why you get meditation, you get Tai Chi movement practices,
the walking meditations, or active discussion with people that, like, what is it called? The Dialogos. That is something. So go look it up, guys. Dialogos. And actually, I think
they're about to hit Dialogos here in a few minutes.
So that's a practice of incorporating both sides of it: the scaling down and the scaling up, the singular individual piece and the whole. And yet again, that's the game B. You know, we're at the point right now where we can't afford to just only be on one half of the two halves that make up this whole thing.
Yeah, and we're certainly in a very dominant left brain.
Oh yeah, well, right now. You know, we got to make a rule for everything. And I heard a quote. I forget who was the quote, but the more rules a society has, the more tyrannical it is. So within your mind, the more rules that you have to make for yourself, the more tyrannical it's becoming, and it will be self-destructive. Yeah. Whereas, you know, and this goes back to the 50-part lecture series that we covered that Vervaeke did. It's, well, problem with making a rule is, well, you make the rule, but then there's a bunch of contingencies for the rule. Like, well, I've got a rule, just be kind. Well, what kind of kind? Like, kind to your mother, kind to your child, kind to your lover, kind to the stranger, kind, you know, like, there's so many. Well, okay, the rule fails.
Yeah. And if you want to
rules
get
aren't
into
enough.
This, if you want to get into this on a very deep level, look up John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series. We did cover that previously here on the Meaning Making 101 show. And, you know, it's 50 1 hour, sometimes 1 hour plus lectures. And it certainly gets into the nitty gritty, not just detailing what is the meaning crisis, but how we may help usher in an awakening.
And how we got there.
How we got there, yeah.
Like the first half was how we got there.
Awesome, yeah.
It's how we got there. What are we doing there, and how do we get out of it?
Yeah, it's like a journey through ancient history all the way up to now.
Oh, dude, that was awesome. Thanks for twisting my arm up.
Yeah, right.
Involved.
Yeah, thank you for joining me on it, man. It helps so much to have somebody to relay and bounce back with. I was having trouble being able to understand it on my own, really. I needed someone that I could actually talk to about it.
The burden of being a community.
Yes. We are like ants. We definitely are much more powerful together.
Simple rule: do not harm the others. But who are the others? Now we have more contingencies.
I love how Ramana Maharshi, when asked by one of his students, but how to deal with others, man, and Ramana was like, "There are no others." That's the orientation.
Well, that's the answer to that rule. That rule that you put up there, Mr. Ninja Bat. There you go. That was slick. That was quick.
Nice. Hey.
Nice.
Right on. That's what we do. We try.
We try. Operative word. Try.
All right. Jumping on back. Wait, let me make sure I'm at the right point here. 30. We're ready. Going.
Humans run culture, which enables us to be niche traversing animals. And we can be in one niche, we can unplug from that niche, we can traverse to another niche, which requires a different kind of culture, and we can actually modify that culture. And so we are not obligate. Culture is not obligate. Sorry, a specific culture is not obligate to us. We have a plasticity in the ability to navigate from being a desert people to being a jungle people in at least some number of generations all the way. And some of us must by necessity be more affordant to that because they're the ones who have to prototype the new culture as they move across. Okay, so that's ambient. That's just a native faculty.
That's just a native faculty. That's something that is there in us already. That capacity is built into the species.
Well, that's the battle between the liberal and the conservative as far as personality-wise. You know, there's something that wants to hold on to the original and then something wants to branch out. say, into something else or to make something new.
Yeah, there's the part that's trying to constrain and say, hey, we got something good here. We got to keep this structure sound. There's someone saying, yeah, but this part of it isn't working as well. We got to progress and come up with a new way of doing it.
And a healthy relationship would be the taking the steps together and helping each other up the step, opposed to trying to crush the other one.
Like the left and the right wings of a bird.
Yeah.
Takes two wings to fly, fam.
And you got to flap them in coordination, because if the seagull's going like this, they ain't going nowhere.
No, right.
You know. And for the people just listening, I was making my arms go opposite from each other, and it looked really stupid. Free as a bird, you identify away.
And boom. Here we go.
Still muted.
The experience is, first order, the experience can be quite alienating, because you are no longer able to participate in the first order culture in the same way that everybody else does. Yep. I mean, the simple example is you can't take football seriously. And I don't mean to cynically, and I don't mean like, oh, I'm better than everybody else, but literally like, oh man, like that's a thing that matters to people in a real way.
I don't get it.
And I can't connect to that anymore. And I used to, in my case, I grew up in Texas. I know how to take that seriously. But what happens is you begin to see it as actually, okay, it's a particular cultural tradition. It's an artifact. It satisfies needs in a certain way. And I now can, of course, see all these other ones. So this isn't that uncommon. Many people have that kind of meta perspective as part of the
It's a natural part of development. A lot of teenagers go through that.
I
don't know what I think that there's certain cultural systems that take advantage of that, that we witness causing a lot of chaos right now. Take advantage of children's desire to not fit in.
Do not fit in.
Yes.
We call them commies. Just joking.
Well, there's a lot of different styles that young people take on because they want to forge independence.
Well, sure,
differentiate ourselves.
And that is actually healthy. The young rebelling. So it's like, okay, imagine 3 generations.
You got to do that to be able to learn how to be independent and be self-sufficient.
Yeah, and I think the stable way that it has worked for a long time under Game A, that I think is still worth saving under Game A, is you say, imagine 3 generations. You have the young, the parents of the young, and then the old. And the young is rebelling against the parents, right? But the parents were rebelling against the old. But if the young do it right and are, they're told stories about, from hanging out with grandpa and all this other stuff, and he's like, you don't even know. Now the young are incorporating things that were rebelled against by the parents that are from the old. And it creates a healthy cycle that keeps going. What we're dealing with now, or at least the way I see it, is there's no even interaction with that 3rd generation from the young, so it's just rebel. Just rebel. Right. You don't know what you're rebelling against, but it's okay because it's the process.
We're no longer handing
the process. Worship the revolution,
Yeah.
And whether you're worshipful or not, it's very tempting to fall into that,
That's how we become ideologically possessed, because we have that built into us to want to be in communion, to want to be a part of something.
Yeah.
And
sure, yeah. There's safety within the rebellious horde, as long as you're facing the right direction and you somewhat yell out the right thing, right?
Yeah, and we want to feel like we're on the side of right, and boy, isn't it a lot easier just to signal virtue rather than actually learn to be
young
virtuous?
People are actually pretty good at pointing out things that are not necessarily fair.
Very good at pushing at the edges of what's possible or what's admissible.
They may not be, and this is species too, but the young are good at pointing out what might not be fair or what might not be just or whatever you call it. But they may not have the wisdom to actually know the full particulars about why something is
potential
the way
ramifications,
it is.
why this didn't work before, and so on.
Or all the starting points of it. It's like the 3-body problem. Unless you can completely predict the starting points of all 3 of these bodies that are orbiting around each other, you can't predict the future.
The outcome. All the potential outcomes, right?
Yeah.
All right, jumping back, fam.
Yeah. Now, an entire culture system. So one is you might actually be a 1.5. That's really the adolescent sensibility. You're 1.5, meaning you're of a culture, you're slightly alienated from it, which means that you can act as an editor. You're acting as the editorial function. What happens then is you transition from into maturity as somebody who has read-write access to the culture. You then have authority, but you're still in the culture. Right? So what happens. Like you exit it in halfway and then come back. If you exit it all the way, and this happens for people if you've immigrated from one culture to another culture, you're actually alien to the second culture, but you're trying to figure out how to enter into it. So you have an unusual experience of not being native, but being more and more able to adopt it from the point of view of the part where all cultures are roughly the same in a deep way. Like the deeper you go into the substrate, there's certain characteristics that are invariant, and say, okay, you can do a translation, then begin to adopt them, and kind of you can go native. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I think that's at the core of the American experience. Is this integration, cultures coming, and in the case of America, most of American history is people fleeing from something else, whether it's oppression or a famine or anything else, fleeing, and then because of circumstances and the brutal intolerance of reality, integrating with the other people. Yeah, you may have the Chinese have a different culture than the Irish, but they've had to fulfill the same roles within a community, or similar enough roles, or sympathetic roles within the community, where they have to find the core true nuggets that the core truths that are cross variant culturally. They regardless of the variation of the culture, there's that truth still through it. Food's a good one. Music's another good one to look at, but it goes even deeper. And then integration. When you are the going native, that's integration. So whatever, if you are one of these star seeds going out into a culture to figure it out, wherever you land, you have to integrate within that. The seed does not just grow upon the rock, but has to find a nook and get into that nook and find that niche. A niche in your home is a nook. A niche, or the same word, is a nook within.
Yeah.
You got to find that. No seed survives upon the rock, but in between the rocks,
find your niche.
And then the rocks live within you, and you become a big ass tree. So, if you,
transitioning into the new way.
Yeah, and so leading into, we're going from game, where our sojourns going from game A into game B. We are literally going into something, we'll call it transitioning into a new culture. So transculturally, the idea is we need to build a new culture. Or I don't want to say new, because it's not separate.
Figure out what are the healthy roots of enculturation.
Yeah, growing from those healthy roots. Yeah.
That helps us adapt and certainly grow, at least new aspects of the current culture. So it's like the Buckminster Fuller about create a new system that makes the existing obsolete, but don't tear down the existing system. First, you gotta kind of be doing these two things at the same time.
Yeah. And hey,
so that you can have that new system to jump into as the existing one is crashing down.
Yeah, and don't go jumping.
The old aspects of that old one are being.
And don't go jumping into other, cultures, systems, and just destroying it because you think you're better.
Right.
That's what that's the colonists.
You're going to alienate yourself all around in that case.
Well, yeah, that's this whole gripe on the far fringes of the left about colonizers and all that stuff. That's what they accuse them of doing, jumping into the cultures and oppressing that system. That's mentally and culturally speaking.
And there's an important truth there that they're hyper focused on, but it's. So we need to incorporate the insights from all perspectives that we can that are valid.
Yeah, so don't just jump into something and destroy it because it's new land to get on, but, go native, figure out how you can make your system and their system better if you're looking at, self and others.
Actually help them be able to marry together.
And then become that.
Mutually beneficial fashion.
And if it's worth anything, then it'll work.
And game B is all about finding those win-win zero-sum game solutions.
Yeah. No, not zero-sum, non-zero sum.
Non-zero sum, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Indeed. So here we go, jump in.
Greater than one sum.
And start playing with that, and start to try to think about things like, well, not just a given culture, not being present to a given culture. What does it start to think about as culture qua culture as an object of investigation? What does it think about, say, culture design, which FYI is a really interesting problem because it has an inversion. Like you go through a looking glass when you do that, because obviously the culture is there's some minimum viable degree of content that is in the process of doing design that imports itself. And so you kind of flip through if you try to do that work.
Another crisis.
In my case, what ended up happening is this thing that I call transcendent mind. Is you begin to notice there's a whole set of human faculties that are not strictly bound to culture, that are perfectly functional and can't be derivative of culture by their very nature. Intuition would be a simple example.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so becoming meta-aware of culture as a process. The language we speak is.
But at one extent too, it's not just how we think. It is a component, but there are commonalities that are beyond culture. Yet again, and so
deeper
like,
than
well, and intuition, like every culture has the ability to sense when something's wrong, like the feeling of knowing there's somebody behind you looking at you. That's not a cultural thing. It's not even a human
cultural
thing.
Responses to when that kind of insight comes along.
Well, sometimes people put masks on the back of their head to keep the tigers away.
Right.
Others sit in a circle so they can all watch each other's back. But there's something core to feeling that thing creeping up behind you. That's beyond culture. That's transcultural.
And that's what makes it so that we can go native into a new culture. And
because at the core of it all, we have more similarities more similarities as humans than we don't. But the things that aren't similar about different cultures, we need to talk about. And we shouldn't be afraid of, hate speech and, oh, you're being bigoted because of this. It's like, yeah, maybe some people are bigoted, but have a conversation with them. Maybe you'll change your mind. Oh, God forbid, maybe your mind gets changed.
Or maybe you that black gentleman that spoke with all the KKK guys, Daryl.
Oh, Daryl. No, wait. Daryl Davis.
Davis, thank you.
Daryl Davis.
Yes, look that guy up, man.
He's an interesting fellow, and he's not right wing. He's not even center. He's not even any of that. He's actually a pretty far lefty, and he did actually really good work because he took the time as a very obviously big black guy to go
jazz musician,
hang out with the KKK people and talk with them.
He turned so many of them away from it that it's incredible, man. Like over 100 or something like that. He befriended a lot of these guys.
He has Grand Wizard's robes that were given to him by an ex-Grand Wizard because they were just like, dude, change my opinion. Yeah. That's courage right there, right? Yeah. Stepping into something where not just feel, but those people are programmed to hate you. Mm-hmm. That culture is programmed to be
talk about
not
courage,
of you.
Man. And he's definitely coming from a loving, very open, genuine place to pull this off. It's just such a high level of beautiful, heartful courage. Props to Daryl Davis.
And all of us can do that. Talk with your friends that are just, a little too far to the left or the right for your taste, depending on what side you're on, and actually really talk with them.
Understand there's a term value orientation. Find out where their values are, what they value. That is the root of the different beliefs that they subscribe to, because then it'll make it much more relatable and understandable why they're believing what they believe.
Yeah. There's a core that's beyond cultures too. That thing that's that's what they were getting at in that part. Yeah. It's just like
culture is a process. So understanding how that process works helps us tap into many different cultural perspectives.
Well, 2 comes after 1 and 3 comes after 2. And 4 comes after, and the numbers can be all different, but there is a concept of comes after, comes before, or
there's
that is beyond the number
as well. Yeah. Like 2 + 2 always equals 4.
But also so does 3 + 1, and 4 + 0.
That's true. Never equals 5.
And 10 - 6.
All right, so we jumping back. Here we go.
Square root of 20.
Lifting off.
Meditation helps a lot. The notion where you begin to notice that the language that you speak is not actually how you think. The saying of it is not the origin of the idea. The ideas come from a very different location that are more holistic in nature, by the way. And then eventually can be reduced into saying. And there's an aspect of your mind that really likes to take ownership and think that it's what did the work because it said it, but that's not actually where it lives. And so settling into transcendent mind, which again just happens to be a native faculty, then enables a way of navigating reality, which is different than what I would call paradigmatic mind. And paradigmatic mind is the toolkit that is ultimately bound to a given cultural construct, is produced by it and reproduces it. And historically, what we've done is we have rested on top of transcendent mind, optimized using paradigmatic mind. When we needed to transition from one niche to another, some of us would move back into transcendent mind, and then enable the transition of the paradigm to a new paradigm. We went from one niche to another niche, and usually over a period of generations. And that's historically, and I mean anthropologically, that's how we do it.
Yeah, like a breathing, expanding in and out.
Yeah. So we basically relied on those that could tap back into transcendent mind to realize the new possibility space and help.
That's why conservatives need liberals and liberals need conservatives. Because, well, the conservatives are good at holding down the homestead, and the liberals are good at going out and figuring out what's at the end of the homestead. But
boy, and what if we could all transcend our political or our particular political ideological standpoints and.
Because I'm using conservative and liberal not politically, but as in like the mentality,
the value of liberalism and conservatism at once.
Yeah. Well, your brain's doing that, like I know, what is it? Richard Dawkins would say that, that's an oversimplification or slightly off, but I'm going to go ahead and use it. One part of your brain is conservative. It deals with the things that it knows. And the other, part is very liberal. It deals with the things that are unknown. And
very innovative.
When they're not communicating, you'll have one half of your body dressing you and the other half not dressing you. That's a lobotomy thing, by the way. Whoa. Check it out.
So paradigmatic mind is basically our minds can be stuck in one paradigm, one way of viewing.
Yeah, that would be the conservative mind, if you will.
Or the liberal mind. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and hey, actually, what's weird about today is, conservatives can be very liberal and liberals can be very conservative. And it's like we're being forced as a species into a non-dual state of existence. We are now, according to our agent arena relationship with the universe, not afforded the either or anymore.
The fact that we have a capacity for self-transcendence tells us that it's part of the optimization process for us as a species. We are capable of experiencing.
We're growing up past the infancy of the light and the dark, and through the angsty teenage years of dwelling in each and feeling it out, now into adulthood of now you have to use both. You have to use
we're getting out of our adolescence as a species. We're getting to the point to where we are learning how to cultivate this innate capacity for self-transcendence in mass. En masse.
And it's going to be a necessity. That yet again, it's the make it or break it, the fly or die thing right now. It's like we're kind of having to deal with this.
These wings got to start learning how to work together. We're going to continue in the tailspin. So here we go, jumping back.
Obviously, in the context where things are changing more and more rapidly, that approach becomes very challenging. It doesn't work. This is kind of like the generation gap, the 20th century. The fact that you would have a paradigmatic world in your grandfather's life that is so different from your life that the rate of transmission between the two starts having discontinuities and aporias between them and become increasingly difficult to cross-communicate.
Yes. So there's a distance between us and the previous generations now, such that we're no longer being, the rate of transmission has increased so rapidly that there's a discontinuity. We're not able to integrate the lessons learned or the experiences or even understand very much and relate to the experiences of our grandfathers or father's generation.
Well, like
increasingly difficult for us to communicate.
Like what I was talking about earlier about, the child rebelling against the parents who are rebelling against the grandparents, but the child, say, is spoiled by the grandparents, gets the stories from the grandparents. Well, we don't have that relation.
No, we don't have that.
I don't like saying this. We don't. It's like, no, we do.
We have less
but
of it,
we're
though.
Leaning away from, we have been leaning away from that.
Yeah, it's crucial to have that intergenerational relationship.
Well, you remember storytellers. When you were young, there was always people that are really good at telling stories, and usually it was an older person. And they would sit down, and all the kids are super excited, and then
a lost art.
And even the adults would be pulled in after a while. And then it brings everybody together. But then I don't know where it happened because one reason I haven't been alive long enough to see it really shift. Yeah, we lost that. We lost our stories. We stopped intergenerationally communicating. and it's I think it's hard for the children and the parents to have that communication. Now, there's a lot of good families that do that, but being able to jump over and then jump back, and then once the parent point where they have their kids, it's like, oh, I understand what I put you through,
Right.
and now I'm gonna have to put this my kid through this same thing.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you're here to spoil the little rotten bastard
Mm-hmm.
and get him out of my hair for a little bit, and wind him up and set him loose so I can get him,
give me some insights as well as an adult now that I can understand a little bit better.
And this is a metaphor for culture and personally within oneself as well. So this multi-generational disconnect that we're having, this is a personal thing, a cultural thing, and direct family thing, as well as specially thing. Who reads history anymore? Who reads the philosophies anymore? Yeah, there's some of us, but it was kind of a more common thing for people to talk with because that's all we had. Talk with each other, have this conversation. Like go. And like I wouldn't sacrifice all the technology in the world to go back to that, but we need to figure out how to incorporate that the grandfather generation of the just talking to each other into this new generation of mass distributed decentralized media, and then the parents being the mainstream media thing, because that's where we learned how to do this from, and now we look better than they do when they try to do what we do, and then eventually we're going to have to rescue our fathers from the belly of the whale.
Truth.
So there's that too.
An ever increasing storm
that's going faster and faster and faster and faster.
Yeehaw!
Yeah. Of course, as the curve gets steeper, the way my friend Josh Brill taught me to think about it, this is really quite a beautiful metaphor, and I have to be careful not to steal it because it's so nice. In music, if I have rhythm, let's just start with beat. I just beat, do, 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 right? I can increase the rate of that beat so it goes faster. As I continue to increase it, it's moving from a quantitative increase, BPM going up. There's a bend where it becomes qualitative. It becomes tone. Rhythm converts to tone. Qualitative, the introduction of the qualitative in the quantitative is a tremendously powerful thing to think about. You're actually having a modal shift. Now, technically, by the way, you can always go back and say, yeah, that's actually 14,440 BPM. But the phenomenological distinction between hearing it as rhythm and noticing that there's an emergence of something called tone is significant. Right? It's actually the emergence of a new layer of experience.
Yeah. It's a whole new understanding of reality.
And as rhythm is to tone, beat is to chord. So you have a beat. That's a 3 to 4 beat polyrhythm. If you sped that up, it turns into a basic they're called double stops when you do them on a string instrument, but 2-note chord. You add another one in there, and then you speed it up, you get another chord. You get more chords, and you'll have a series of tones, 7 tones in total. Well, their relationship at point 1 is called one thing. We call it Ionian. Point 2, Dorian. Point 3, Phrygian. Point 4, I don't punch like Lydian, cool. Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. That's one thing scaled up to the next thing. Names for it.
Great example.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a modal shift.
I keep pressing the wrong buttons, guys.
Buttons. Who's got the buttons?
Yeah. All right, so we've got just a few more clips now. It looks like 4 or 5 short ones. Jump on through it.
I won't talk as long.
Anything happens here. Right? As the pace of change increases past a certain threshold, you don't go from paradigmatic mind, transcendent mind, paradigmatic mind, transcendent mind, paradigmatic mind, transcendent mind, because you just can't. A whole new structure emerges, which is centered on transcendent mind and has the ability to produce minimum viable paradigmatic constructs when necessary in relationship with a particular context, but is ultimately grounded in transcendent mind. That's the ultimately the game B transition. End of digression, by the way.
Going from this way, orienting from this way to this way. From going up, from these paradigmatic encapsulations, if you will. Like, this is where we are. We're going from that up, but we need to be able to hold ourselves up and move down. So now it's a shift. We need to be doing this.
Yeah, we
Both
don't
of them
want to
at
be
the
stuck
same
in a
time.
closed loop. We want to be able to telescope with change.
Well, now that we're global, we have to start looking more gestaltly, and not
while
just
still being able to operate on the
when we
once.
need it to be like, okay, well, I need to center in on this thing because
But we can't
something
lose the
popped up.
transcendent perspective because it helps us see the gestalt of all the potential interactions.
So I guess where are we grounding ourselves in our observation? Are we grounding ourselves in just the thing?
Yeah.
Or which is pretty much where we've been for the start of all human
We're trying
human
to
civilization.
learn how to take meditation from just sitting on the cushion in the morning or in the afternoon into life, to make of life an art itself.
Well, that's the flow.
All of life to be from a meditative
That's
place.
the flow state, right?
Yeah, that is the flow state.
That's the flow state.
That is our optimal state. We're able to achieve miraculous endeavors from that place. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, check out John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. He covers a lot of
Heck,
this stuff. And actually, I have to give him more of a shout out. He'll help you with the vocabulary, going through it so you understand what they're talking about. This is pretty high-minded, hoity-toity kind of stuff until you get into the vocabulary, and it's like, well, damn, that's just the simplest word to use to encapsulate this idea of a thing.
Mm-hmm. And to be able to continue talking about these broad concepts and more increasingly concise and succinct ways. Otherwise, it's it's going to take forever. It would have, a 50-hour lecture series would have been 500.
Oh yeah, and
without the proper language.
So, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, it's a great introduction into the conversation and the vernacular, as clear as I've seen.
Absolutely. All righty, guys, here we go. Now we understand the game B transition, at least generally. Man, the second half of this conversation is so good. So look forward to next week, guys, where we cover part 2 of this. Jumping back.
Wow.
That was the journey, right? So the fork, where people like Brett and Jim went one way and I and a couple other people went another way, is that
Did you gloss where they went or what they're trying to do? Like engineer, it's like more of an engineering mindset, like tools.
I mean, as far as I can tell, Brett and I we don't talk a whole lot, but I've been to his house a couple of times in the past few years and talked to him a little bit. He's very focused on the relationship between culture and politics, and the sociological, socio-technical domain.
If we do this to get this result, we can save the West, is what he's saying right now.
Yeah, and there's things low in the stack, like, okay, we need to change the political structure in some very particular way.
Yeah.
And that's all well and good. Like, if that's where he wants to focus his energy, there's nothing wrong about fighting that fire. But from my point of view, the West itself as a construct is not adequate to the scope of the problem we're dealing with.
Yeah. That's where I run up against it too.
That's not an insult against the West. That's just where we're at because of the increasing rate of change. It's part of the game A way of approaching things, and it's becoming outmoded, not by any fault of its own, but just by the fact that we are now getting to where our species needs to be operating more from that transcendent realm of operation.
I venture to say that Western culture,
it's supposed to be ever growing and ever improving anyway. Well, American dream should never be fully realized. It's
not
always
just America, but the Western European culture has set things up for this crisis to happen because it needs to happen for the next steps to happen.
Birth pains, yeah, right.
Exactly. It's the inevitable outcome of the culture that has...
It's gotten us to this point.
Yeah, us to this point.
Yes.
For good or for bad, but it has provided, or it has created affordances for these states of being and these interactions to happen. Whether you're looking at it as morally good or morally not, but here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
And, since I'm the United States of America, I'm going to go ahead and say we in Western culture. Now, but it has gotten as far as, if you look at China, they took their traditional historic ideals, stuck communism on top of it, almost killed it out, brought in the worst parts of capitalism into it, and then we're touched by that. Everywhere in the world has been touched by this culture this Western culture in one way or another. And even communism, like, well,
has had to adopt the free market.
Well, you can blame the Germans and the French for that. It's the German philosophers that are really down with the French stuff. So, well, even, if you look at Russia, but Russian fashion was based off of, like, way back in the day, when we were talking about before the Bolshevik Revolution was based off of French stuff anyway.
It wasn't even the French and the Germans. It was humans.
Well, yeah, they're humans. Yeah,
humans humaning, doing what they do.
Well, but culturally speaking, though,
right.
It was like...
Right. That's where it stemmed from, modern age.
And then, well, all of the instruments we had, we have, and the music we have has made multiple migrations across the planet over and over and over again. So, and now we're truly planetary, where cultures will infect each other. And I say infect, but in a good way, like a beneficent virus.
Yes.
Because I'm on. I like blues. I like this the 7-tone ripped out of 14-tone scale that we used. That didn't start in any one place. Like, well, okay, the English invasion is a good example. It's like, well, they took American blues and rock and they tried to do it there, but that culture wasn't ready for it yet. So they came to the United States and we were just primed for it. And then they did the very English thing. Like, man, Beatles, like Pink Floyd, all that stuff. And then, well, then it went back and it reinfected Britain.
Off. Yes, it did.
It's like, that's what cultures do.
That's the decorate. And then the Beatles tripped on acid, ended up in
India.
Oh, yeah,
in India, they had their own, like, yogi. Man, yeah, right?
And the marriage, the meeting of the East and the West really got into a deep place there, because now we're speaking together and from the substrate, from the music, which is so close to the underlying nature of it.
And not the first time it happened, like the story of Prince Siddhartha, Buddha, was very much West and the East coming together and figuring out things as well.
And where did Jesus go when he went into the desert,
Yeah, it's happened many times before. Different this time. Bigger, more
and faster.
And faster.
Bigger, faster, stronger.
Bigger, faster, stronger.
Fine.
Some of them are very viable. So with all that put together, it just feels like once we start to try to jigger with culture in this day and age, what you described about, like, the grandpas and our grandfathers and our fathers and then ourselves and then our children are being in totally different kind of cultural bubbles, and then there's all this distance between that. There's this accrual of pain and suffering that's not being dealt with. There's a lot of, like, hurt that happened in my grandfather's time that wasn't passed to me as knowledge, and because we don't have the same cultural constructs, it's lost.
Maybe
and so I can perceive, or what you're making me feel is that if we start to do that too quickly, to try to go meta too quickly, like, all that pain and suffering is going to manifest.
Well,
yes.
Intergenerational trauma. So I don't know how many people
unintegrated intergenerational.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, so it's like, okay, well, he was talking about, I don't know about what my grandfather went through and all that stuff because there wasn't time, but there are cases where now it's just stories been told of just suffering and suffering and suffering, and now you have young people with intergenerational trauma that don't even understanding what the suffering was because they weren't told the story about it. They were just told that you're suffering, and it's because of them.
Yeah.
Like, man, like, and it's too fast, right? It takes time for the understanding. It takes time to tell the story. And not just this quick story to make this myth, so you can share in my suffering, so I can make you bitter too.
Yeah,
it's like, no, well, I suffered. I don't want you to suffer. I don't want you to suffer too.
The low resolution impression is not helpful for us.
Yeah, it's been bothering me, man.
Yeah, that was well said. That's a great point by Benjamin Boyce over here.
Yeah, no, he's a sharp fellow. You should check out the other.
Such a great work. His podcast is excellent.
He interviews a very, very, very diverse group of thinkers and just from pretty much any perspective you can think of. He's probably interviewed somebody and still has this nice, calm
Yeah.
Demeanor,
Talk to
very
anybody.
inviting.
Can truly sympathize with anybody. Yeah, definitely. Check the link in the description here, guys, and like and subscribe. Benjamin Boyce as well. All right, so we're almost to the end. Just a
And
couple
yeah.
more clips now, guys.
I know we're getting up on the the hour and 45-minute mark, but good. This is a good video to cover. And
think so.
I don't think it's able to be encapsulated in just clips because it's very broad.
It's too complicated.
To distill. Their discussion is very broad.
And oversimplify. At least we're hopefully making it a little bit more accessible and bringing new people to the subject matter that would not have found it otherwise. That's the hope here. So here we go, guys. Jump on over.
Cultural constructs, but the healing isn't happening, and the healing has to be a part of the process.
Right. So you made this like tease apart. By the way, I would love it when the conversation gets to this phase. Like everything up to here was something like being able to have this part of the conversation. But now we're at dialogos, right? Now we're actually sharing a similar spiritual space, and we're both collaborating and trying to discern something that is endeavoring to use us to communicate it. Yeah? So I'm in utter surrender to that, by the way.
I like how he puts that.
Almost becoming possessed by it.
Surrendering to dialogos. Yeah. So now we're at the end. Both of us are at the edge of our mutual understanding, but we built up and set up the conversation enough to be able to get to this edge and approach it together. We can perhaps figure it out together. And then you notice like it's almost like a third entity or an entity that is built out of both of our minds is able to start working through us. Very fascinating.
And
very fascinating.
So
And
we're at like the
dialogos.
halfway point of this this video.
Yep.
Next week will be the next half. Go ahead and check out this video. The link will be in the description because it's damn good and kind of important to where we're going podcast and what we're trying to talk about in a roundabout way as best as we can. And these are two major players within this game. Well, this game B. Yeah, see what I did there.
Hey.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so one last little bit here, guys, and then we're gonna call it an evening. Bada bing, bada boom, jumping over.
So this notion of healing is very connected to the notion of wholeness. Right? Your own wholeness, like how do you integrate things in yourself so you can come into wholeness, but actually your wholeness with reality, with life. And how only you being whole are able to sort of enter into a proper, non-constricted or defensive relationship with the world you're entering into. So as harm accrues, if that harm cannot be metabolized into a kind of wisdom, and it cannot be integrated into something which can then be transmitted to form lineage, continuity of contact across time, into something that has a quality of relational being itself, an identity that is, transitioning. Two things happen. One is that that harm it accumulates, right? And as we try to create constructs out of mostly mental models, right? We try to create constructs out of the narratives, ideologies, stories that we tell ourselves, of course, various forms of repression, like all those different elements. Obviously, repression is not going to heal the harm; it just literally holds it, and that begins to build up over time in a wide variety of different ways. And we begin to get what Vervaeke calls reciprocal closure, because your ability, how do you say, like three things happen. You haven't actually taken advantage of the suffering of those who have come before you. And I don't mean that at all meanly. I mean, literally, why suffer? Well, the reason why you suffer is so that you can produce wisdom as a result.
Yeah.
All right. So you don't benefit from the fact that those who have come before you have suffered so that you can receive that wisdom. That's cut off. You're cut off from that. Second, because you're actually accumulating all these pieces of unintegrated harm, and usually various kinds of coping mechanisms, you're carrying a heavier load as you're not benefiting from wisdom. And third, because you're carrying a heavier load as you're not benefiting from wisdom, you literally become less capable of being in relationship with the reality you're experiencing. So there's an accelerating level, right? So that's from the point of view of the meaning crisis, that's the cascade effect catastrophe.
That is the meaning crisis. Okay. So we're going to leave it there, guys, because it's going to get into a whole other level of the conversation now that we aren't going to try and squeeze into this already almost 2-hour episode. Thank you guys so much for, man,
it's worth the watch.
Pressing the buttons.
Hey, you know, anybody who's with us this week, if you're intrigued about this video, it's a good video. Go ahead and watch the whole thing.
There it is. It's called Courage in the Age of Madness on Benjamin A. Boyce's YouTube channel.
And then next week, we can all get back together and talk, have the conversation, and hopefully reach somewhat of a level of dialogos. Sorry.
Yeah, let's let's find a niche that we can work on together here, guys. And yeah, so throw it on your comments, your thoughts, your questions.
Remember to be polite, because dialogos doesn't work with strictly adversary mentality. It's complementary.
Yeah, trying to prove one's intellect or be right or any of that kind of stuff is not unnecessary
and just not helpful.
No. You got to get out of the ego mode to play this game, and then that's.
But if you're going to do a good troll, I have appreciation of good trolls, but it has to be a good troll. Don't be a mid-tier troller if you're going to be around here.
Oh yeah, your sense of humor is welcome.
Oh yeah,
wit is always helpful. Yeah. So we love you guys. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Meaning Making 101 here on Actuali Podcast. Once again, if you appreciate what we're doing here, make sure that you like and subscribe. And of course, your comments help the algorithm more than anything. Make sure that you give Benjamin Boyce and Jordan Hall likes and subscribes as well. Their channels are both available here on YouTube. And see you guys next time. Love you guys.
Meow.